Thanks for joining us today for this Thursday afternoon program. I'm Dylan Ryder from the Johnson County Library. We have the privilege to be joined today by Karen Sillens from A+ Career and Resume, who will be talking about interviewing. Some quick information about our presenter. Karen Sillens is a multi-certified and award-winning career and business coach. Karen provides resume writing, career and executive coaching, and small business coaching to clients in Kansas City and throughout the U.S. and Canada. Karen has held a membership in the prestigious Forbes Coaches Council since 2016 and was chosen as one of 38 career experts to watch in 2018 on Twitter and is rated as a top social media influencer for employment, human resources, and recruitment on Agiliance. She resides in Kansas City, Missouri with her husband Andrew and their 4 rescue dogs. We'll see if we hear from them today. Feel free to add your comments and questions to participate in our discussion. Karen will attempt to address each question at different points throughout the presentation. Again, the contents of the program will be recorded for future viewing. And that's all I have. Thank you again. And here you go, Karen.
Thank you. Well, I have to say that the dogs have been very good during my presentations, that I only had a couple of experiences with you hearing the collars jingling in the background. So they're not photobombing me much. One thing you'll want to know about any of my programs, for anybody who hasn't attended one already, is that I'm not here to sell you anything. I'm here to give you information that you can use right away, whether it's writing your resume or doing a job search or right now, actually in interviewing. So you could literally put this to work today if you were getting an interview on the phone or via video at 5 o'clock this evening. So let's talk a bit about interviewing and the different things you're going to go through and the different things you want to consider in interviewing. So first we want to talk about phone, video, and text screening interviews, because the first contact you usually have from the company outside of scheduling a time is suddenly you get that text or they call you and want to schedule that phone interview. The classic phone interview still exists. Plenty of my clients get them. And the thing about the classic phone interview is that you never know whether it's going to be this 5-minute just true screening call or if they're actually going to spend a half an hour with you. And sometimes that depends on the interviewer and how much of a relationship you can develop with them quickly, so they want to talk to you more. The classic phone interview is all about different tips and tactics to make sure that you come over as the most professional person that you can. And we'll be talking about that as far as what we want for that particular type of screening interview. Next is the phone versus artificial intelligence. So you're talking to a computer. That is horrifying for a lot of people. I understand why it is, and it's an unfortunate and depersonalizing thing, in my opinion. I don't think companies should be doing it. I realize they want to save time, but the more you depersonalize the job search, the more you make your company unattractive. This is one of the things that companies will do, saying it saves them great time, but I think it chases a lot of people off. You have a certain amount of time to come up with your answer, or the computer system will move on. And usually it's just a few questions, 5, 7, maybe 10 questions. And that's it. You answer them. If you don't give an answer quick enough, it just moves on, so that it skips to the next question. And that's part of the problem. Since you don't know what they're going to ask, you can't possibly totally be prepared. And so if you hem and haw a little bit trying to come up with your answer, it could just skip that question. Do not assume that that takes you out of the running. This is happening to everyone who's getting this type of interview. Next is the text interview. Here's the deal about texting. It's great when they text you and say, would you like to interview? It's not great when, what happened to one of my friends who got one of these, that they just start interviewing you at that moment, not realizing that this wasn't a good time. People are assuming they're texting to find out, hey, let's get something scheduled. And a lot of times they're texting you to start interviewing at that moment. That catches you off guard. And in the case of my friend, caught him in the parking lot of our church. So that was not an appropriate time to be trying to interview. Be sure if you get a text asking you if it's a good time to interview or when can we schedule a time, that you write back to them, what times do you have available? Never say yes or no, because that could mean you get an interview right then or there. The two-way video interview. So this is similar to Dylan and I here talking together on the webcast. What happens is that they call you, they set up the video time, and you're literally interviewing almost as if you're in person. Now, this is also happening for traditional interviews now that would have been in person in order to obviously avoid COVID. So people are utilizing this technology more and more for interviewing. Next is video versus artificial intelligence. This makes people really uncomfortable, and usually you wind up signing several documents about this, saying, yes, you release this information and all that kind of stuff, which makes people even more uncomfortable. I tell my clients it is up to them as to how comfortable they are doing this or not. If they do not want to do this, then I absolutely support them in saying this is not the company for me. Again, it's another depersonalization of the job search, and I don't find it to be an appropriate way to interview people, but that is my opinion. And unfortunately, some companies are really buying into this and having people do these screening interviews via video, but there's no one on the other end. And similar to the phone interview versus AI, you're also having this little peak of time where you get to actually have that answer ready, and then it moves on. So that can be a little scary too. Sometimes they ask some really unusual questions. I had a client who got one recently, and she went ahead and accepted everything to go ahead and do this. And they asked her 5 questions, and 2 of the 5 were the following. 1, what's your favorite movie line? And second, what's your favorite dessert? So she felt like she had given the best answer she could to those, considering that doesn't have anything to do with the interview. And unfortunately, she did not move forward in the process. So she said either they did not like my dessert answer or they did not like my movie quote, which was very innocuous. The dreaded salary question. Oh, they want to ask you about your salary. Keep track of what you put on their system. Usually they ask it on the system, hey, $40,000 to $50,000 a year, 50 to 70, whatever. They're going to ask you, you need to reflect that number back to them and say, obviously this would all be based on, salary, benefits, the entire package. But, I gave that range, and always try to give them a range. Do not give them just an arbitrary number, because you don't know how far away from their number you are. And you can always add then to the end of it, you're negotiable. But if you just say, I'm negotiable, and push it back on them, you can get some very angry people on the other end of the line who are saying that they want a number from you right now. Beyond that, I wouldn't give them too many more specifics on it. They usually don't ask for more specifics than that. Though they may say sometimes, hey, this is what we're looking to pay. Does this meet your requirements at this time? And that's really nice when they actually tell you that, because if it's way below what you're expecting, you can move on to somebody else at that point. So how to have the best screening interview. Number 1, hands-free headset or landline, and a computer that has a decent camera on it, and anything that you can do to make the sound in the background disappear. The problem with a lot of times on a phone is it's noisy in your background. So here's some of the things that I deal with on a regular basis just in doing phone interviews or a video interview with a client. Pets, because I have pets, so I know all about that. People walking through and talking loudly. Their television's on. When it comes to the phone, it's a problem if you're on a speakerphone. Speakerphones are problems for multiple reasons. 1, you speak, they speak, you think they're done, now you start to speak again, but they keep on going. They just took a break to breathe. You didn't know it, so now you guys are staggering back and forth. That's not a good call. Be on either a headset or a landline of some sort, or hold that cell phone up to your mouth so you don't have that speakerphone issue. The other thing is the noise that it also creates. I tell people speakerphones kind of sound a little bit like you're either at a bad McDonald's drive-through speaker or you're in a giant bathroom and everything's echoing back to you. That's not a good experience. So avoid those if you can. Next, consult your notes. Have everything in front of you for any sort of interview. Job listing, the research you've done, your resume and cover letter that you sent to them. That's going to really help you be prepared. And plus, you might also mark off, hey, how do my skills match what they're wanting? So if you get into a deeper discussion, you can feel confident in having it. Turn off your call waiting and text alerts if you can, so you're not constantly getting during the middle of the call. That tends to be very distracting to people, including you. So you're right in the middle of a thought. That happens now. You're not sure what to do. You're not sure where you were in what you were talking about. It doesn't look very good. Have a proper backdrop for video interviews. Oh, I can't begin to give you enough information on this one. There's books behind me and a chessboard and a vase. You know, there's not inappropriate things behind me. I have had people who have stuff behind them that's really just going to create a whole lot of questions. Pot leaves, pictures of people that, you know, for whatever reason, you know, a president or something, take it off the wall. You know, if you want to have your cross on the wall or anything, a Star of David, go for it. But if you're going to have something that is a hot button issue for people, such as any president, quite frankly, any of that kind of stuff, take it off of there. You know, any posters for organizations that could upset people. And I hear people when they say, hey, you know, that's my personal opinion, da 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 da. What does that have to do with this job? Well, you're making a first impression, so your first impression should be good. And that means they're not distracted by anything else you have in your background. Make the background very general, or a bookcase like I have, something that can't create problems for you. There's also the distractions of public places. A lot of people feel the need to go to public places to do things. And now that we're starting to have a little bit of freedom again, that's going to start up. Well, you can't be interviewing at Starbucks. I'm sorry. There's too much noise in the background. Interview at your house, or go get the library, see if you can use one of their rooms. Go to a friend's house if they've got a quiet place, but you need someplace quiet to do your interviews where you can concentrate and you're not creating distractions that interrupt what the interviewer is trying to do. Secure a babysitter. No additional people, no television on in the background, radio, computer noise, just you alone in a room with them on the computer. Take notes by hand unless you have a quiet laptop that you can take notes on. Usually a traditional computer, the actual keyboard that comes with it can be a little noisy. You'll want to test it out with other people in the background, maybe doing one of the free Zoom conferences to see how it sounds. And if there's no noise that they're really hearing, then go for it. If not, take your notes by hand. Another thing is have a glass of water nearby. You're going to become amazingly thirsty the minute you start interviewing. It happens every time. My clients are like, oh, I forgot the water. Do not forget some water near you. It's really going to help. And now, let's say you start getting really thirsty, you can ask for that moment to take a drink of water, or just pick it up and drink. Use a mirror. A lot of clients go, well, what's that all about? I don't want you in a phone interview having the issue that a lot of people do have. And that is because we're more casual when we're on the phone, we make faces and do things we would not do on a video interview or in person. Because on a video interview, we can usually see ourselves out of the periphery, our picture somewhere on there. Not the case with the phone interview. So when you're interviewing in that kind of realm, you want to be able to see yourself and see the faces that you're making. I know that sounds silly, but if you have a question where you don't answer it quite the way you want to, the next thing you know, oh, Now we're kind of got the frowny face going on. And then, ooh, the next question didn't go well either. So now I'm red in the face and my ears are hot and all that kind of stuff. You can see that when you look in a mirror real quick and change that frown to a smile and make sure that you sound happy and confident. And I've actually had clients call me after a phone interview that started going south and say, hey, that really does work. I turned that around. I thought, oh, there's no way. And yet at the end of that phone interview, they invited me in for an in-person interview. Well, it was that smiling and bringing back your confidence and making sure that you felt like the professional you were, instead of, ooh, I've got my PJs on and now I'm frowning and I'm upset. So even for a phone interview, you're going to dress the part. Have questions for the interviewer, but don't play stump the interviewer. If it's an HR generalist, they will be able to answer different questions than, let's say, the recruiter for that position. And I mean an internal recruiter, who that's what they do every day. They recruit for specific positions within the company, so they know more about them. They're not going to know as much as the hiring manager for that position, who would most likely be your boss. So each one of these people has a different level of understanding. So you ask them different questions. You keep it more general with the HR generalist, who do you report to, all that kind of stuff. And then you can get much more specific with the hiring manager. Dressing doesn't mean that you have to be fancy. It doesn't mean you need to put your three-piece suit on to get onto the video interview or the phone interview. But for men or women, a nice blouse for women, a shirt, possibly a tie if you feel like it for guys, but a nice shirt. Have it look professional, whether it's a polo or it's your traditional button down. The other thing that people often don't realize is going on is they aren't wearing appropriate things on their lower body, and they have to get up and get something, and suddenly there's their underwear. I know that sounds silly, but it really does happen, and there's been many horror stories about it. So please make sure that you have pants on, as silly as that sounds. And don't have sweatpants on in case you get up with your nice shirt. Have a pair of jeans or something that looks appropriate with it on. The dress the part for a traditional video interview that's longer. So now this is the interview, or once you go in person is even more important, because this is more formalized. Even if the person sitting in front of you has a t-shirt on, you still need to look the part. One, your clothing matters. So please, again, professional from the waist up and something appropriate on from the waist down. Shoes in the interview actually do matter. I know that sounds silly, but if you get to go on site to the place, you want to make sure you have the appropriate shoes on. No tennis shoes, no open toe shoes for women. Make sure that they're appropriately office type shoes. Hosiery for women is fine in an in-person interview, particularly if it's the winter. You can do the opaque tights. Socks for men, and I actually don't mind it if they're a little creative, as long as they're not way out there. Sometimes men like to wear some colorful socks, and that can be a point of conversation as long as they're not too wild. Makeup for women, absolutely. That is a necessity. And a lot of women, I get the frowny face from them when I say that. You look better with a little bit of makeup on. We're not talking about let's dump as much makeup as we can on your face. We're talking about mascara, blush, and some tinted lip gloss. If you want to do a little bit more than that, you can. But if that's what you're comfortable with, that limited amount, go for it. And as silly as it sounds, ladies, please put your eyebrows back on if they're gone. I have salt and pepper eyebrows. So if I don't color over them, these are my real eyebrows, it's just I have to color over them every day. You need to make sure that they frame your face and have you look age appropriate. Then hair. It should definitely look as if you combed it. There's a TV show on that. When I said that to a client recently, we were joking about it, that this guy has his hair looks like he did it with a drill or something. I don't know. It looks weird. It's all curled out, and it's not an attractive hairstyle. And I said, you know, it's one thing when you have just a wonderful hairstyle that is part of you. An afro, for instance, can be just incredibly beautiful. It's another thing when it looks like you didn't bother to comb your hair. There's a big difference. So be sure that your hair is appropriate for an interview in having something done with it that day. It doesn't really matter so much what it is, but that it looks like you've taken time with it. Next, cleanliness of person and clothing. So I have seen people go into interviews, they've got stains and stuff on their shirts. Guess what everybody's staring at? It's just like having a piercing in your lip or your nose. People are staring at that going, did that hurt? Take it out just for the interview. Once you get the job, I guarantee you they won't care if you have the piercing. But there's something about even people who have piercings themselves will stare at your piercing. This eliminates a lot of problems for you. And then jewelry. Jewelry, as far as how much should you wear? I like rings. I only have 2 on right now. I don't need 10 on. So keep it delicate, keep it just a couple. You can have small earrings and a little necklace or something, that's fine. Men, you can definitely have your watch, you can have your wedding ring, if you have one other ring you want to wear, all of that's fine. It's when we start getting all the jingly bracelets, we want bunches of rings on ourselves, that we're putting all kinds of extra, you know, giant hoops on and things like that. Save that for another time. We want to keep things a little bit smaller for the interview, just to stay on the more traditional looking side. Musts for an in-person interview: please be on time. And that means be early. There's a saying from the military, if you're early, you're on time. If you're on time, you are late. And that is true. So 10 to 20 minutes. And all you're going to do is make sure that, you know, you've got a good parking space. You walk in. If you need to use the facilities beforehand, you don't have toilet paper trailing on your shoe. You know, everything's tucked in like it's supposed to. You feel good, you look good, and you sit and you wait. And you can just have a book or something with you, you know, appropriate book, say something about business maybe, or motivational, and just sit there and even just pretend to read until then. Now, I would not arrive more than 20 minutes early and go in. 20 minutes is probably your limit. Once you get too early, you know, people seem to always be running rather late. This eliminates them feeling overly stressed because you got there too early. But sometimes they're ready to go and they'll take you at 20 minutes till. Another thing is drive ahead to the location and scout parking. Many a person has been late to an interview because of that. If you get down there and you find out you can't find parking and it's a struggle, and then you have a long walk in and everything, you could be very late, very sweaty, very upset by the time you get into your interview. Take the time to find out beforehand what it's going to be like. And anticipate traffic snarls. If you're at lunchtime, if there's construction on the highway that you have to go on, you may want to find an alternate route to make it easier for you. Shaking hands, we don't do that much anymore because of COVID. I don't know if that'll come back. So we're going to have to watch and see, depending upon if there's a vaccine made, if people get back into the habit of shaking hands. But I still wanted to have it on there because some people will still automatically reach their hand out. Do not feel like you must take their hand at this point if you're uncomfortable. And all you have to say is, oh, I would love to, you know, but of course, COVID. And then they'll understand. Some people just naturally still reach their hand out. Take notes during an interview. There's actually a book out there that says don't take notes during an interview. Every interviewer I've ever talked to and asked about that has said that's one of the dumbest things they've ever heard. You're not going to memorize everything. You look ill prepared according to them. Now, these are people that interview people every day. And you're going to wind up not having enough information in your own notes because you didn't take any to write a thank you letter or to have anything for the next interview, reminders of things. Maybe they gave you what they were going to pay, but you forgot to put it down, and now you got home and you've forgotten it. People say, well, I wouldn't forget that. People forget that stuff all the time. This is avoiding that problem by having those notes that you can take. And maybe because they said something, that prompts a question for you. Well, you can't interrupt them at that moment and ask that question. You can write it down. Now you have it going forward so you can ask it later. Avoid slang terms. I think we all know what those are, and this isn't just cussing, of course, but this is just a slang term for something. If you feel that someone was disrespectful to you, say that. Don't say they dissed you. It's just considered a little too casual. And sometimes people almost speak in a text-like language, and that's not appropriate either. We want to spell things out and sound appropriate, whether we're texting in an interview, whether we're on a phone interview, or whether we're on video in person, whichever one, be appropriate. Get rid of gum, mints, chewing tobacco. You think you don't have to say those things, you have to say those things. If you had seen what I've seen in interviews over the years, you'd know that that has to be told to people. Sometimes you're not thinking about it. You were just chewing gum, trying to keep your mouth, so you didn't drink too much water and have to get up in the middle of the interview for reasons understood. But you get into the interview and you're not thinking about it. The gum's still in your mouth. You need to consider that so you don't have that issue walking in. Turn off your phone. Nothing like I'm sexy and I know it coming up in the middle of an interview. And I realize that sometimes it's kind of hard. You're like, oh, I don't want to miss out on something. Well, people will leave you a message or text you. So make sure you turn your alerts and everything off. Just turn the phone off. There's nothing that important that you have to take that phone call at that moment. Sit for success. That's something people don't realize can be really problematic. Video or in person. So if you're sitting and you have your leg bouncing from above, you look like you're doing this, even if they can't see your legs bouncing. If they can see that it's bouncing, most likely one of the interviewers wants to reach over and stop you. Sit with your legs in a position where you can cross your ankles. That will stop you from doing that. And I know it sounds silly. You think, well, it's sitting. But if you start bouncing stuff, then now it makes it hard for them to concentrate on the interview. Instead, they're concentrating on what are they doing? Why are they shaking? That's what they're going to think on the video interview for sure. And in person, they're going to be like, can I make them stop bouncing their feet? And a lot of us do it when we're nervous. But it's a little different when you've got the 6-year-old kid doing it versus you have a 35-year-old person in front of you doing that. And be positive. Oh my gosh, some people will come in and complain about their prior employers and tell every negative thing about how their life has been unfair. Not for the interview. In fact, not really appropriate to share. How about we talk about how great things are? Because the positive is what's going to get you a job. And anything that you can do will help. Anything that you can do positive will help. You don't want to necessarily be a Pollyanna or, I joke, a Tigger from the Winnie the Pooh story, but you definitely want to come across as somebody who you're not going to come in and be a negative Nancy every day. There was a question that popped up about research, and research during an interview for an interview, it should be all about what the company does and what you can find out about them from the press. Now, we definitely covered this last week in the job search portion of the program, so you can either go back and listen to that once it's posted online, or it may actually be posted now. And if that's so, I'm sure Dylan will bring up the link for you. But this is something that's important, that you know as much about the organization as you can and what they do. A primary question in an interview is, tell us what you know about our company. And way too often, people can't answer the question effectively. Now, at the top of the second page of my handout, I have a very important statement for you. You are interviewing them, just as much as they are interviewing you. You must be able to intersperse your questions throughout the interview and not have this be a one-way conversation. If they do not understand that you're interviewing them too, there's a problem. And companies say, oh, well, you can ask your questions at the end. But ironically, if you don't have any questions at the end, they're mad at you. Oh, that was unprofessional. If you do have questions at the end, they're mad at you because, I have to go someplace. They took too much of the time. So now they don't have time to take your questions. If you can have a conversation with them, you get to ask your questions, they get to ask their questions, and it's a much more pleasant situation. And you can actually say to them, if they say, well, can you hold your questions to the end? You can say to them, well, obviously, we're both interviewing each other, and I think you would agree with that. If we can have a little bit more of a conversation during the time, and I'll try to save some of mine for the end, I think that would create a better interaction. Wouldn't you agree? Get them to say yes to you. Once they say yes, you're in. I've never had anybody go, no, wait till the end or die. Never had that happen. So be sure to push, gently, but push, to make sure that you get to ask questions as well. And you shouldn't have 45 of them for a 1-hour interview. 7 of them maybe in that whole time would be a good number to keep with, and 3 to 4 for a half-hour interview. So, types of interviews you run into. Oh my gosh. So, most interviews are a hodgepodge of several different types. Though every once in a while, you'll find somebody got the interview list off the applicant tracking system and is just going down that list, which is usually full of nothing but behavioral interview questions. So, behavioral interviewing is the same as situational interviewing, is the same as performance-based interviewing, is the same as competency-based interviewing. It's all about somebody wanting to write a book, so they change the name of the interview type. But if you think in simple terms, it's asking you to describe how you handled a given point in time. So if they ask you, tell me about a time when you handled a difficult situation, keep in mind they didn't say it went poorly. It's kind of a general question, so you probably want to have something like that prepared before you ever walk in the door. And you want to talk about maybe a client interaction where you saved the day, or something to do with a deal that was going through that there were problems with it, or you had a particular problem trying to get pricing for a sale. Whatever it is, show that it's an actual problem at a point in time, not something that's a general, well, I deal with difficult situations based on how they are at the moment. No, you've lost them. Give them a real example of something you did, and it has to be specific, okay? Think car when you do this. So I love to use car because people think well in 2s and 3s. Once you get outside of 3s and you start using star and all of that kind of stuff, to me, you're starting to have problems. You're giving people too many things to have to worry about. Car is simple. Your challenge, your action, your result, period. What was the challenge you faced, the action you took, and what was the positive result, unless they asked for a negative outcome, that you accomplished? That's it. And prepare some of these answers ahead of time. The nice thing is, next week at the one about career portfolios, I'm going to give you a whole list of things to utilize to create these. So if you can be in attendance or sign up so you can at least get the information from the program, you'll have that list. Questions typically begin with the following for behavioral interviewing. Tell me about a time when. Give me an example of. Describe a time when, or if this happened, how would you handle it? People are great for about the first 4 or 5 of them. And then whoever is in the back of our head giving us the answers, they've gone to lunch. Now we're just taking those same 4 or 5 answers and using them over and over again, trying to make them sound different. If you can create some information ahead of that interview, and even take it with you in the career portfolio, as I'm going to teach you about next week, you're going to have an arsenal of answers with you to utilize, and if you need to refer to them, you'll have them with you. The next thing is the case study. Case studies are like big challenge, action, and result answers. A case study is usually just given to you. It's a paragraph to a whole page, and it's an example of a challenge the company's had. Now, it may not be real, but it is an example of the challenge a company's had. When you answer what you would do, so if this is the action you would take and the result you believe you'd achieve, be sure you've read the example twice and tell them you're doing that. Don't make them think you're slow when you read. Just say, hey, I always like to read these twice. Kind of like going and seeing a movie twice. The first time you caught certain things, and the second time you caught a whole bunch of other information that you didn't register at that moment. This gives you a chance to really know what the example's about. Plus, since you're a little nervous, having that second read through is certainly not going to hurt you. Then sometimes there's a person in that example, in that case study, who took an action that's typically wrong. We don't talk about them. We're going to call them Joey. Joey is not to be discussed because Joey may be sitting in front of you. And I actually tell my clients, if they keep pushing you to find out about how you feel about Joey's approach to the issue, I would ask them if any of them are Joey. You can do it and be funny about it if you want, if they're a good group of humorous people, or if the one interviewer is very humorous. If not, you can be serious and say, I never want to say anything negative in any way about a person because I wasn't there when they were approaching a project. I just want to make sure that the person in this example is not in this room. And usually they laugh. That's what they usually do. And you know what? About half the time, that person's in the room. Usually these are real examples of somebody that did something that was not quite right. And I have interviewers as clients who really give these type of these type of examples to their interviewees purposely to see what they're going to do. One of my favorite was a national sales manager for a food distribution company in the Northeast who was interviewing new potential salespeople for the New York region. And when he got this one particular guy, the man was sharp, 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 sharp. And so after he read the stuff and started kind of giving what he would do, he said, after reading these two examples, I wonder who the moron is that did these two things. Well, that moron was my client. And he liked to give two examples of things he did when he was a young and not as prepared salesperson. And the guy knew he'd stuck his foot in his mouth, but instead of being able to come back from it, he just kind of wilted and could barely give his name after that, and unfortunately lost out on the job. My client really thought it was funny when he said it, because he said salespeople are kind of like that. We're a little bit different breed. Unfortunately, because he couldn't recover from that, he lost the job. Had he just been able to say, oh, I'm so sorry, I got so comfortable with you, I wasn't thinking when I was talking, he would have saved that interview. And it's really quite unfortunate. Demonstration interviews. These shock people, and I've actually had clients who tell stories about getting up, crying, and leaving the room. So let's talk about what we do to keep these from being such a problem. Usually demonstration interviews happen for people that are maybe in IT and are programmers. They'll ask you to program, use a little code for them that they use in their stuff, and they want to see how you code. They might ask you to demonstrate your skills in Microsoft Excel. They might ask you to sell them this pen if you're a salesperson, or what would you write as ad copy for this for a marketing person? And of course, for the traditional administrative assistant, they may ask you to type for them. What's your typing speed? I know that certain people expect it, but let's talk about how we handle it. If you are in sales or marketing, please use the typical way you would construct an ad copy campaign for this, or how you would sell an item in the first place. Needs assessment, all the different aspects that you go through to sell an item. That's how you want to sell the pen. Most people get that question and they have a dumbfounded look on their face. I'm not kidding. There's no reason for that. The person who's getting the typing test can go to typingtest.com and test out their typing over and over again and speed themselves up. The person who knows Microsoft Excel but maybe could use a little refresher on some things can go to Microsoft.com and take some free modules to increase their skills in it. However, sometimes you just get a surprise right there in the middle of the interview. Let's say at your company, they used ACT, and this new company uses Salesforce, which are customer relationship management tools. You're not familiar with Salesforce, but maybe you're a little bit more familiar with it than you think you are because you've used ACT, which is one of the biggies out there. What you do is you say instead, hey, although I'm not familiar with this system, let me give it a try. You can fail miserably and they will still love you most likely because you were unafraid to try something new. This is where a lot of people get up and cry and leave. Instead, you just boldly went forward and gave it a try, and you'll be shocked as to how often you'll actually be able to use it. A lot of programs are very intuitive. They're like a similar Microsoft program. A lot of the programmers understand out there they have to create a certain amount of ability to be intuitive as to what's going to happen next. Well, now you've got the time to sit there and say, hey, I'm not afraid to try something new. May not go like we hope, but I'm going to give it a try. And that will look good because they're going to assume if they're willing to try it, they're willing to be trained. And that can be the one thing that gets you the job. Next is the group versus the panel interview. Both of them technically are a group of people, but the panel interview is a select group of people who have prepared before you walked in the door. The panel interview is a group of people who care, to put it lightly. And I know that that sounds bad. It doesn't mean the group doesn't want you there, but it's a very different situation. The panels had your interview or had your information, including your resume and cover letter, probably 2 to 5 days before they ever interviewed you. They've gone through it. They've created questions to ask. Even if they've only had it for a day, they've still had time to prepare. And they're usually cross-section. There'll be an HR manager there, whoever's going to be your boss, a couple people from the department, that kind of stuff. So now everybody there is going to ask you questions, and they're going to be prepared to talk to you. Be sure when a person over here asks you a question that you answer the question to everybody. Don't just answer it to one person, answer it to everyone. That gives you the huge benefit of looking like you're doing a presentation, but not in the, here's my PowerPoint. It's a really great way to showcase to people that you understand you can't just stare at one person and make everybody else feel involved. And that's what you're wanting to do. You're wanting to involve everybody in your answer. The group interview is different. 5 minutes before you get there, the person that's bringing you in for the interview is running up and down the hall trying to get people to come in to interview you. Unfortunately, these are the times when people give me horror stories of people talking loudly on their phone in the middle of the interview because they answered a call, sitting on their laptop the whole time playing with emails, playing with their phone, texting, Twitter, Facebook, who knows, but they're not paying attention, doodling on their resume, falling asleep, and the best one, twirling in a chair. Now, I realize that you may not want to be in that interview, but please, if you are involved in an interview that you got invited to 5 minutes before, give the person your attention because you guys are the ones that called him in there, whether you did it personally or not. However, if you're on the receiving end of this type of interview, the best thing that you can do is start asking some of your questions early and have them be questions the group has to answer. I would love to hear why each of you came here to this company and why you stay. Questions that you ask that are about them are their favorite kind of questions. Now, they may be a little shocked. They may have a kind of strange look on their faces. They try to figure out their answers. But when you ask questions about someone else, you make them feel more part of the process. Now the person that's on their phone and not paying attention, or hopefully not asleep, but if they are, They get to wake up now and answer a question. They have to be involved. And the more involvement that you get them in, the more likely you're going to have a good interview. It's involvement that's with a purpose. You're asking about themselves and what's everyone's favorite subject. Me, 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 me. Even shy people, still, ultimately, the favorite subject is going to be themselves. Next, sequential interview. These are interviews sequenced over a half day or a whole day. But we have to be really careful with this because you'll get a call and invited to an interview, and you'll ask how many interviewers are involved, and they'll say 3. You need to ask the following question. Is that consecutive interviews or concurrent? And if they don't know, they need to go find out, because consecutive means you may be 45 minutes with one person. Now there's a half-hour break in between. Now you got another 45-minute interview. Now there's an hour break in between because somebody's running late, and your next interview. Now you're there for half a day. And it's important that you know that before you're so hungry by the end of that and hangry by the end of that interview that it doesn't go well. Some things you can do to prepare for a sequential interview are to have some snacks with you, to make sure if you like to have caffeine during the day, that you do still have caffeine during the day. This is not the day to quit. And to also be sure to have something to read with you, an actual book. I know that a lot of people are like, well, I have my Kindle or I can read off my phone. No, the minute you start playing with your devices, that's what they think you're going to do all day. And if you read a real book or pick up a Forbes or a Business Week or something on your way in, you're going to look like a more well-rounded person. People who read a real book and one that's not questionable. So let's talk about the motivational, the business-minded books, things like that, things that won't create problems. Like I tell people, if it's not business or motivational or maybe like Sherlock Holmes or something, please don't bring it in if it hasn't been written in the last 2,000 years, because it creates problems. People just, they get upset about all kinds of things today. So kind of stick to that guide, stick to the Business Weeks, stick to the Forbes magazines, things like that. So now you're just reading, and you may even just be pretending to read while you're people watching, but people perceive you as smarter. People who read from real books and real magazines are perceived as smarter. It is what it is. You may as well take advantage of it. Next is the stress interview. This is the dumbest of all interview types, and I don't know why companies do it. Somebody sold them on this years ago, or they have a boss that did it to them. The person who's interviewing you is intentionally mean and nasty to you. They ask aggressive questions. They sometimes say outrageous things to see what you're going to do in reaction. And it's pretty upsetting to get that kind of interview. But you need to remember it's not about you in this case, because they're not trying to make you mad in the traditional sense. Usually they have a difficult customer or something that they deal with on a regular basis, and they're testing you. This is a poor test, but they're still testing you. So what you need to do is be careful and keep that positive attitude and be assertive. Answer your questions. If they're sitting there just looking at you and they're doing that stall tactic to see if you feel the need to fill that time with talk, you just wait and you look at them with a pleasant look and wait until they're done, or if they're writing all their notes supposedly and everything. But be positive and assertive. They're looking for the person who's aggressive, who starts coming back at them. Well, let me tell you something, mister, that's not the person that's going to get hired. Or the person that's overly passive, that's starting to shrink down in their chair because they're thinking, why is this person being so mean? Now, as I explained to companies, when you interview somebody with this technique, if you just feel you have to use it, then you just feel the need to tell them at the end that they went through a stress interview. Do not let them walk out without telling them what you did. Because how many of you want to work for that company if they're really rude and nasty to you? Probably not very many of you. Unfortunately, a lot of these companies lose out on really good people because they don't know if the interviewer's doing a stress interview or the interviewer is just a jerk. So don't let them question that. Next is the free information interview. Now, these are actually a good thing to use. They're informational interviews. And what they're for is for you to go and just talk to somebody, usually about their career. You're not trying to get a job from them. And this usually happens when people are in career transition. So maybe they think they want to work in a certain industry, in a certain job type. So what they're going to go do is talk to a couple of people who work in that industry, and they're going to find out what brought you to this industry. Did you have to get any special education to do this? Are there any certifications required, or would they be better if I got them before I started? You can find out what they like most about it, what they like least about it, and if they're going to continue to stay in that industry. People who love their job, a lot of times you're just, 10 minutes, I need 10 or 15 minutes of your time. They'll give you an hour and a half. And it's great because you'll get a lot of good information. But sometimes also talking to the person who's not so thrilled about the industry can be just as beneficial to you. But you never do it to waste a person's time. Offer to buy them a cup of coffee, whatever you have to do, or just tell them, I'm only going to take 10 minutes. If you choose to talk to me longer, that's awesome. But I want you to know I'm only going to try to take 10 minutes of your time to talk to you. Watch the interviewer's body language. Here's why. Interviewers will lie to you sometimes, so you'll come work for them. I know, it's a shocker. Just like interviewees lie and say, ooh, I have this degree when I don't have it to try to get a job, interviewers will lie to get you to come. So I had a client who was interviewing at a company here in town, and it was up north of the river, and that's all I'm going to say. And he asked about their typical work hours. And the interviewer was sure to tell them how, oh, it's 8 to 5, unless we have special projects, which we don't have very often. So most people leave here at 5 o'clock every day. But when she did that, she did some things that I teach my clients about. One was she tweaked her nose. That is something a lot of times your brain doesn't like it when you lie. So it tells you by doing things like making your nose itch. And so she was tweaking her nose, and she moved her butt up out of the chair and repositioned herself, which means she's uncomfortable. And she was I think she was maneuvering her legs. She was bouncing it. All of a sudden, no reason. Those are 3 signs all together, boom, that there may be a lie going on. So he drove by. It was like 4:30 when he interviewed. So he was getting out right around 5. He noticed nobody was leaving, but he came back around 5:45, ran some errands up there. Everybody's still there. Comes by again around 6:30. Everybody's still there. Goes to dinner with his wife and comes back at 7:30. Every car is still in the parking lot. So he gets a second interview, and he asks the gal, well, can you tell me a little bit about your hours again? Because she wanted to know if he had any questions. And she reiterated the very same thing. And he said, so are you working on any big projects right now? Oh, no, we haven't done that for months. Gotcha. So he proceeded to bring up nicely, well, I was wondering if you could explain something to me. And he described what he'd done. And he said, at 7:30, all the cars were still in the parking lot. And I wonder what you had to say to that. She didn't answer him. She just went forward with the interview for the second interview. That means I got you. You got caught. And she knew she got caught, and she wouldn't even admit it. So needless to say, even though he got offered that job, he turned it down. I have many examples of clients using body language to their advantage to determine that the person they were talking to wasn't telling them the truth. But one of the big things that you can do and just notice is, do you feel like during some really important things where they're talking about your pay, they're talking about the work hours, what it's like to work there, what's the workplace culture, how is employee engagement, all those different things, the important questions. Do you feel like they're telling you the truth? Or do you get that little hinky feeling in the back of your head that something's not quite right? That means your mind's catching something with the eye in your subconscious that your conscious mind is not catching. And I think that means you should ask some more questions. So just so you know, you will get lied to if you haven't already. And if you can catch it, that will help you to keep from taking a job that could be a big problem for you. Illegal questions. Now, illegal questions are really interesting. A lot of people think that companies just, other than your like behavioral questions and tell me about yourself, they can't ask you anything. They can ask a lot of stuff and they can find ways around things. For instance, they're going to know your age if they ask when you graduated from high school. They're going to know your age. But we want to be careful of why they're asking the question. My last boss in corporate America asked me the following, and this was over 20 years ago. Are you married? Do you have any children? What's your husband do for a living, et cetera, et cetera? You can't ask those questions. But he wasn't doing it to be mean. Most interviewers, or to try to get me to tell him something, most interviewers are untrained. The bad thing about that is they're not taught what they can and can't ask. So you put them in the bad position of asking questions sometimes that they don't even realize are going to be problematic and could get the company sued. If instead you just determine that the person's asking them just informationally to kind of develop some rapport, just answer the questions. I did, and I got that job that day. If you ask questions back to them, be careful what you ask back as far as questioning as to why they're making that inquiry. So if they ask you about your religious preference, that would raise a red flag to me. But I might, instead of saying, well, you can't ask that question, which now you know you're not getting hired, you might say something to the effect of, well, interesting, why do you ask? The next thing you know, they see that you had a cross around your neck or something on that told them something that you might be of a certain religious persuasion, and they're of the same religious persuasion. Well, now you've just established commonality with that person, and that may be a real positive for you. And yes, you should use that if you can. So find out why first before you just make an accusation, unless the question's just way out of bounds. Like the guy who asked me out on a date back when I was in my early 20s. So, and with a wedding ring on my finger at the time too. So that is inappropriate. But sometimes the other questions are not done for that reason. They just don't know. So don't assume. You should ask questions during the interview. Doesn't matter whether it's a phone interview, doesn't matter whether it's a video interview or an in-person. Texting, you usually can't ask the questions, but the rest of them you can. So here is the problem. We've talked about it earlier. Oh, well, we'd like you to wait till the end to ask your questions. Don't play the game. Remember what I said, just say something to them about, us both interviewing each other, and I think that's going to give us a better outcome, so both of us can make a great decision in the end. Wouldn't you agree? And once they say yes, you can ask questions. That's what we're doing. We're getting them to agree with us. And quite frankly, if somebody didn't agree and thought that they should just be able to do an interrogation of you for an hour, I would get up and leave. Because what's that going to say about them as an employer? Sometimes people put up with things that they should never put up with. I had a client sit down, and I am not kidding you. She's a nurse practitioner. She's sitting down for this interview in California, and this guy asks her, I kid you not, I'm surprised she didn't pass out when he said it. He goes, so either you're a military wife or you're a lesbian. Really? So this kind of goes back to the illegal questions and putting things down that, or asking things that aren't quite appropriate at the time, or pushing buttons in people, which they'll do too. She said, well, what does that have to do with anything? And he said, well, usually somebody moves from where you moved to out here. They've either had a bad relationship breakup, or they're a military wife. You're moving around with your husband. And she goes, well, really, I'm not sure what that has to do with my ability to do my job. And she was a military wife, And as she left, she said, I don't think it matters what my sexual persuasion is, or whether my husband was in the military, or if I had a wife and they were in the military, but you're welcome for their service, and walked out. So I thought that was pretty great. But don't let somebody be rude to you. And that's what my real point of this is. A lot of times people say things to you and they're quite outrageous, and they think they're being funny, or they think they're making a great statement, but I guarantee you they're not going to be a good person to work for. Do not play that game with them. Whether they won't let you ask questions during the interview or they ask you unreasonable things. So here's some interview questions you can ask and feel good about. Ask them why the position's available. People say, well, I don't know why, if I should ask them that. Well, of course you should. You want to know if it's new or existing. Now, sometimes they'll tell you it's existing. Then you can follow up instead and just ask the question, oh, well, do you have any new goals for this position? But usually you have no clue. You need to know one of two things. If it's a new position, have they fully fleshed it out in order to understand what the person needs to do? Because if it's a really general ad, they may not totally know what they want. And the next thing you know, you're getting people coffee. Then the other part of this is to make sure, why is this position available, as far as if the last person in the job created any problems. And people say, I can't ask that in an interview. Yes, you can. You just have to be nice how you ask it. You can say to them, I was just wondering, did this person move up in the company? Maybe it's the person that's interviewing you. Did the person leave because the grass was greener, maybe someplace else, they got a job offer? Or was there an issue? And if there was, I don't need to know exactly what their issue was, but if there were any problems that it caused in the department, I would love to know that going in, only because, hey, knowing that kind of stuff, I'm not afraid of it, just want to know it before I get into the department. You're kind of already talking about like you're going to be there without saying, when do I get the job? But you're also letting them know that it's okay to tell me there's some issues. Wouldn't you rather know going into a position that they're having a couple of problems because of the last person that was in it? Maybe a couple clients that are mad. That's very often one of the problems. If you know that going in, you can start to tackle that right away. And most people aren't afraid to tackle those issues. They just don't want to be surprised by them. And that's what you're trying to avoid. And you know what? My clients are regularly getting questions answered like this, where they say, oh yes, well, they made these two clients mad, and we're hoping you can repair that relationship. That's very helpful for you. Next, how long have you worked here? Well, you should, if it's the interviewer's good, have some of that information already, but they don't necessarily always tell you. So you can ask them how long they've worked here, what brought them to the company, and why do you stay is fascinating. Now, sometimes you do get the I'm looking good to my boss answer, but a lot of times you catch them off guard and you get some really good information. And remember, that question's about them, and people love questions about themselves. Plus, with the how long you've worked here, you know tenure rates. If you're talking to 4 or 5 people, now you're starting to find out how long do people stay with this company, or at least this department. The excited question, I had a client who had great body language issues for that one. She asked this 3-panel interview what made them excited or most excited about working for the company, and she said, right then, she knew she didn't want to work for them because they couldn't have been more uncomfortable. They're squirming in their chairs and they're trying to smile, going, yes, we love it here. It's wonderful. They may as well have held up a sign that said, help me, because they just looked so uncomfortable trying to answer that question. And she said, well, obviously they don't like working there very much. I don't think I'm going to like it either. You can ask them if they've been there for a while. How's the company changed? That can be a really interesting question. And I'll tell you, sometimes an interview is only supposed to go, say, 45 minutes, and it goes an hour and a half. This is when you get the extra ability to ask some of these questions. Sometimes you really only have that 45 minutes. So you know, okay, I'm going to target 5 questions or so to ask them during the interview. Next, the qualities they're looking for in the ideal candidate. You can also ask about opportunities for advancement or training and development. Now, if it's a small company, training and development can make them very nervous because they're like, oh, we don't have a training department. That's okay. Ask them if they make availability and money's available for people to go to professional conferences or to attend occasional stuff in town, like say at the community college or Skill Path or Franklin Covey, something like that. And usually they're actually okay with that. Beware the company that doesn't help you at all in the training area. Especially, it's one of the best things I love about millennials. Millennials really want training. They want to learn, and they're actually hungry for learning. And companies that aren't going to provide it are going to lose them. So as a company, I think it's good to hear whether they're going to provide some training for you. And I'm not just meaning at the outset during the onboarding process. I mean throughout your career there. Next, what's the tenure rate for the employees in the department for which I'll be working? That's a good one to know, because the rest of the company may have a 10-year average tenure rate, but that department has a year, which tells me that there's a boss in that department someplace that's causing all kinds of havoc, or some employees doing that, and you want to find out what's going on. If they're savvy as an interviewer, they'll explain it and tell you, hey, there was a reorganization, that boss is gone, and that's no longer a problem. What's been the biggest challenge in recent years? And you're going to have to add something to this. I didn't want to put this on here permanently, but besides the economy or COVID, everybody's going to use the COVID and economy stuff as an excuse. We can't let them do that. We want to dig deeper and find out what their biggest challenge has been besides those, and how did it impact the company, positive or negative. Sometimes companies have really positive challenges that you would really like to know about. For instance, I'm going to ask you to think back to when you were a kid, and whether it was the Tickle Me Elmo doll, or if it was some Star Wars figurine, or it was the Cabbage Patch doll back when I was a kid. There's always this toy that comes out every few years that everybody has to have, and companies can barely put together enough resources to get them out there. And so people are spending extra money on it, and there's fights at Walmart and all kinds of stuff. Well, that's a good problem for the company to have in the short term, because their product's in such demand. They know well after Christmas they're going to be selling bunches of these things. So they're going to make nice money. They're probably having to put an extra shift on at the factory, the whole 9 yards. That can be a good problem to have. So you want to know about whether it's good or bad. And it can help you in writing a thank you letter to them if you're able to say something about, hey, I remember you told me about, and you give them the example and maybe talk about how you could help in a situation such as that. Then, what is the biggest challenge your company's had? I can impact as an employee. That's the vision of you being in the job. You want to give them that at some point in the interview. That thought of, wow, at some point they're going to be here. This is great. Instead of, so do you have any big challenges that you might want somebody to help you with? No. Ask them for you. First of all, you can get some really great information, again, for that thank you letter. They're impressed with the question usually. And the other thing I like about it is that they tend to start seeing you in that position, and that's what you're going for. The next question is a must as far as number 10. I'm going to skip number 9. I think that's obvious, and that's a more general question. Can you describe your management style and give me 3 examples? I can't ask them for 3 examples. Yes, you can. I've never had anybody told, well, I can't give you 3 examples. Micromanagers do not know they micromanage. I know that's a shocker, but they have no clue they do that. So the only way we're going to potentially find out, and I don't know anybody out there who says, yes, I can't wait to work for a micromanager. The only way you're going to find out if there's some difficulties in their management style usually is to ask them to give you more than 1 example. Because the first example will always be, I'm going to train you and love on you and set you free to fly in your job. And then the second and third one will be ones where I'm going to stand behind you and make you do your work over again and correct everything. And it's only going to be good if I do it and send it to you and all that kind of stuff. No, we need to find that out. And I've had multiple clients now, ever since I've been telling my clients, please ask that question. who have turned down jobs based on the answer from the person who's going to be their direct manager from that question. I want you to ask it. I want you to be unafraid when you ask it. Put a smile on your face and say, well, can you describe your management style and give me 3 examples? Boom. Just do it. It will pay huge dividends if you're able to say no to a job that's going to be a problem. How much better will you feel knowing that you're not taking something you're going to want to leave a month later? Then, where are they seeing the most growth in the company and how are they staffing it? If the company's growing and they're not staffing it, guess what that means for you? So you might want to find that out. The next thing that we want to talk about is dealing with company culture. Not everybody understands what that is, but company culture at its simplest form is what it's like within that organization between management and the employees, period. How do they interact? Is it positive? And that's what you want to find out. Watch their body language, see if they're comfortable answering that question. Then, if you were to rank them, what are the top 3 traits your top performers have? That's a great question for somebody who's looking to move up the chain, going vertically in the company, somebody who maybe is in sales or marketing or wants to be a manager of some sort. Find out what their top performers have. And maybe you can talk about how you fit those characteristics. And then lastly, what can you do? What can you do? Meaning, what can I do when you're in the interview? The first 30 to 90 days to hit the ground running for you. Don't be afraid to ask them how you move forward in the process. I didn't put that question on there, but you do want to ask them. You don't want to find out 3 weeks later that you didn't get the job, but they knew 2.5 weeks ago and they just didn't bother to tell you. That way, and I just told this to Channel 41 today on an interview, if you're getting a interview with a company in person, on the phone, via video, and they don't follow up with you, if you've asked them or they've told you when they're going to be making their decision, it may be kind of a time frame of, a week from now. They haven't given you exact date. And a week and 3 days go by, it is appropriate for you to call them and say the following. Well, I was just calling to check in. I know that you guys are really busy, and I wanted to find out if there was any other information you needed from me to help make your decision. Don't call them and go, did I get the job? Am I going to get the interview? Any of that. See if you can help them with any other information. You will get more people saying something to you, telling you you didn't get the job, calling you back or emailing you than you will if you call them and try to hound them about it. Now, what I will tell you is a certain amount of companies are still going to ghost you. I'm so sorry, and we're going to talk about that here in a couple minutes, but it will happen, and we'll talk about how to deal with that. Basic job interview questions you're going to get are things like, tell me about yourself. Use that to your advantage to pre-answer that question. Here's what you do. You give them a little bit from the resume, the biggest tidbits of information about you that they should know, certifications, education, great success stories, things like that. Then you give them your top 3 hobbies, but make sure they're appropriate. As I like to tell people, if you like to collect Nazi memorabilia, twist ties, and cigarette butts, please let that be your little secret. You need to be sure you're giving them information that they can grasp onto. So I like to show them active mind and active body. For instance, do you like to jog? Do you go work out? Are you a walker? My husband walks. I mean, he's a walker. He does the fight for climb air every year. And this year he did it 3 times. For a 57-year-old guy, I'd say that's pretty good. He loves to go for a walk. And I love to walk. So that's a good thing to say. I'm not going to cost you as much on your health insurance now. Next, you can show active mind. What do you like to read? Let's not talk about Star Wars and Star Trek and romance novels. Let's talk about something that maybe is more business-minded, or maybe you like to read history, things like that, and you don't get too specific. Or you can talk about perhaps you like to play chess. Things like that show that you have a more active mind. Now, you can also combine that into creative aspects of the things that you like to do. Do you love music? And do you play a musical instrument or sing? Or do you do something that has to do with artwork? You draw, you paint. That kind of thing shows I have interests outside of work. I have a life outside of work, but I'm going to bring that creativity, I'm going to bring that active mind, and I'm going to bring that active body into your workplace. I'm going to be a healthier employee, but I'm also going to be a more active employee for you. Tell me about your career, your resume, your jobs. That's an annoying question, and I get why it is, because you're thinking, didn't you read the resume? I don't know why they ask that. I really can't tell you other than they didn't read the resume. I've even had clients who told me in the past they tried and asked them, hey, would you like to take a look at the resume first? And they don't take them up on it. So all you can do is, again, give them that 10-second recitation. What's your biggest weakness? Please make sure whatever weakness you give them, and give them a real weakness, don't give them a fake one. Don't give them the Holy Mother of God moment, but give them a real weakness and how you work to keep it from being a problem in the workplace. That's going to be the most positive for you. What are your 3 biggest strengths? What would your last 3 supervisors say about you? Do not give them generic things. I'm hardworking and I'm a nice person. No, you're going to tell them things that are specific about, if you went up to them at a cocktail party and said, describe them in 2 sentences, that you would get good information out of them. And we don't want to go with the negatives here. We want to talk about the positives they're going to say. And those can be everything from, when I have a job that needs to be done, they are my go-to person in this area, to something about how you handle people, handle clients, deal with conflict resolution. There's just inordinate amount of things that you can talk about, but don't give them the generic stuff. Then tell us what you know about our organization. Please know enough when you come in to talk about that. And you could even wrap that into the tell me about yourself question. The reason I'm here and the reason I applied to this job is because of your company. And then you can talk a little bit about what you know about them. They will love you. And then, why are you leaving your current position? Be honest if you've been fired. Don't try to hide it. But sometimes you're not fired and you think you are. Downsizing is not being fired. Fired means you did something that was bad, or you're underperforming, and off you go. The other thing you want to do is to make sure that when you're talking about why you're leaving that position, if you're downsized or your position was eliminated, if you can talk about other people around the same time who had the same thing happen to them, that can be very helpful to you and make it very real to them. It's when you're the only person that that's happened to that they start to question it. Beware of the following interview questions. I don't even think I have to explain these other than, wow, why would you say most of these? The one that makes me really giggle is, which parts of your resume are exaggerated? As if you're going to say, well, that second job on there, I never actually worked there. What do they think you're going to say? Your answer to that should be, by the way, of course, anything on that resume I can explain in detail. The one question to be cautious about is the second to the last one, which says, what makes you more qualified than other candidates? That's a trick question. Please make your answer, although I can't speak to the other candidates' qualifications, let me tell you about mine, or what would you like to know? You have to tell them, I cannot speak to the other qualifications of the other candidates. All I can speak to is mine. Even if you know those people and it's a promotion within the company, you can say, all I can truly speak to is what I can provide. If you start downgrading the competition in any way, a savvy interviewer will just be like, nope, we're not hiring them. And how do you deal with demanding or rude coworkers and managers? I would say to them, is that an issue? That's interesting. What are you doing to address it? That would concern me greatly. If you are fired, be sure to tell them enough of what happened, and if it's an issue, that it's not an issue anymore. Sometimes it's time you had to take off and they didn't follow FMLA or whatever. Don't get into all of that. It was because you were taking care of a parent or whatever. And you need to tell them that situation has resolved itself so it won't be a problem anymore. There's a lot of reasons that I can go into. Usually those are done on a person by person basis because I can't give a general one-all answer for that particular question. All I can say is if you lie to them, you're going to get caught. And even if you get caught 3 months or 3 years or 30 years after you start working there, it can get you fired. That is a fireable offense in every single state out there, no matter how long you've been with the company. So don't lie to them. It's just what you choose to tell them. Sometimes you know the reason you're fired, and this really is the truth. They replaced you with somebody else. I just had a client at a large medical institution here in town. They let go of a whole bunch of people, and they replaced them with people one level below. The job, and it's the job title's one level below. It's like assistant now, but they're doing the same job, so they don't have to pay them as much. It is what it is. And we don't need to get into that part right now. So ghosts, catfish, and benches. Candidate ghosting. You had a great interview. You think, wow, I hope I'm moving forward. You never hear from them again. All you can do is follow up. Don't follow up 25 times. Don't try to teach them a lesson. I've had clients who've tried that too. It's like, no, don't be a stalker. Instead, just let it go. If you don't hear back from them, let it go. If they said it's going to be 3 weeks and it's been a month and a half now, you're probably not going to hear back from them. Don't worry about it. Move on. Act as if that job is gone. Catfishing. You go in and they say it's a marketing manager's position. But when you get in the door, it's a commission-only sales position. Get up, walk out. They're already lying to you. You haven't started working for them yet. Just get up and walk out. You never make it off the bench. This is, they keep you on the line. It's like they're trying to reel you in. And they keep promising you, oh, Joe is going to leave. He's going to retire. Joe's never going to retire. So just let that job go. It isn't going to happen. And I have people tell me that all the time. Oh, but they're telling me if I just wait. No, don't wait. Keep your job search going. Flirting for talent. That's called breadcrumbing. These are actually dating terminology used in the job search now. Flirting for talent. They're not hiring. They're seeing what the talent is out there, stuff like that, but they're not actually looking to hire anyone. And then the catch and release. They can't make a decision. They're not going to make a decision. I don't know if it's because they just can't pull the trigger or if it's almost similar to the breadcrumbing, but some companies just won't make the decision and they'll drag you along with them. If you don't have an offer, you don't have a job, move on. And that will make your life so much easier. Now, there was a question concerning salary that I saw pop up. If you could pop that question up again, Dylan, I would be happy to answer that.
Yeah, Karen Henry was asking where she can research salaries for her current position so she can know whether her interviewer is offering a competitive salary.
One of the best places is Glassdoor, and we talk about that in detail last week on the job search seminar. So you can definitely also watch that and even get more detail. But on Glassdoor, you'll want to go on there, rate a past company. Don't be mean, don't put a nasty gram on there, but be honest in how you felt about it. It is anonymous, but sometimes people take anonymous a little far. So if you can put that information on there, what you do is you access for a variety of positions what the typical stuff is for the pay scale for that. There's also other sites out there that do this, and they have what they call their free salary calculator for you. And those are like payscale.com, salary.com, but you have to go through a lot of stuff to get to the free. Another place, Indeed, sometimes will tell you that. Indeed will often have, this position, from what we can tell, is going to pay this much, but in the industry, it usually pays that much. So those can be good resources with you, along with any research you can do on your own by seeing if you've got any contacts that can give you that information. Sometimes some of your contacts will say, oh, no, they don't pay that much, or, oh, no, they pay great. And you can find that out. Don't let people just say, oh, the company pays wonderfully. find out what that really means so you can give an intelligent answer when they ask you what you're looking to be paid and feel confident in what you're talking to them about.
Right. And what is wonderful to you may not be so wonderful to me, given my situation. I had another question just come in. Daniel asks, how do you negotiate a job search while currently employed so that the current employer doesn't get wind of this?
First of all, don't alert them by making drastic changes on your LinkedIn, especially without at least turning off the notifications that go to people about your changes. Don't put on there that you're open to possibilities and all this kind of stuff. And believe it or not, people do that all the time. So make sure your LinkedIn doesn't scream that you're looking. And also, don't have your resume on Indeed. I just had a client last night. She's like, well, I put my resume on all these job boards. And I'm like, no, take them off. We talked about that. And we did. I tell my clients right up front, do not post your resume to job boards for multiple reasons. One is, I stole your identity because you just gave me your name, your job history, your email address, all that kind of stuff. Number two is your boss being on there looking at people for another job and finding you or looking for you. I happen to know a company here in town that goes on to those sites and searches for their employees. And that's a way for them to downsize you. Do not post your resume on there. Do searches through them. You can put on Indeed that you want to do a search. Let's just go back to sales. Sales manager, then you want like 3 or 4 different sales management titles. But if it's a salesperson, say account manager or account executive, sales executive, or sales coordinator. There's all kinds of different titles, and what you see coming up over and over again, take the top 3 or 4, stick them into that little search thing, and have it send you via email alerts every day. Now the job search is working for you, but you're not putting anything out there that your boss could find.
And one question I had while you were on the subject of tricky matters like how to include a firing in your job history. Do you have any advice for individuals who were formerly incarcerated? They're looking to rejoin the workforce?
Yes. First of all, a lot of times you held a job while you were in prison. Use that job. It's still a job. You may not have gotten paid what you would get paid in the outside world, but you can show that you're a worker. And sometimes somebody within that system will write you a reference letter. I've had many a client who's had that issue, and because they did good work while they were inside, somebody wrote them a reference letter detailing it.
Also, depending on your offense, it could be possibly expunged from your record, which I will add that information into the chat.
I will tell you, though, that doesn't mean that it comes off the internet. If it was reported, a lot of papers and stuff, you can contact them, ask them to take it off. Oh, it's been expunged, and they'll do that. But some of them won't. They're like, nope, once it's out there, and we don't care that it's been expunged. And it will keep popping up like a bad penny. So all you can do is kind of work that down. The other thing, and to get it to at least, if you can, the 3rd page, because most people don't look beyond the 1st or 2nd page and returns on you. The other thing to be mindful of is that if you did something, you did it. And sometimes there's great reasons for why you did something, and sometimes there's not. But sometimes there's funny reasons. And I had a client who got arrested because somebody dared him to walk in some place that was having a police raid that night. So use that. It's hilarious. Now, ultimately, he didn't get convicted or anything. They sent him home. But it's still, that could show up. I mean, it could show up years later. Well, now you have a funny story to tell people. So
You're
sometimes you can use it to your advantage.
I learned a great deal from that night. It looks like we've gotten to the end of our questions. So Thank you all once again for joining us this afternoon, and thank you, Karen, for once again delivering fantastic info. Our next career and finance presentation will take place Wednesday, May 27th at 2 p.m., and will be focused on dealing with reduced income in the age of COVID-19. That May 27 program will feature Denise Dias from the Kansas State Research Extension Office. More career and finance programs are listed at www.jocolibrary.org/events/career-finance. Also, be sure to follow the library's Facebook page, facebook.com/jocolibrary, to receive notifications for more additional live online Johnson County Library programming for all ages. Thank you all once again, and have a wonderful evening.